right, Matt, tell us why you are more bearish than most on the Colts.
So, I mean, listen, they were pretty mild in free agency this year. I mean, of course, they traded for Carson Wentz, which was the big news, is that they traded for Carson Wentz. But outside of that, I mean, like, they did sign Eric Fisher. That said, Eric Fisher is coming off of that Achilles injury. So, listen, if you get good Eric Fisher, then this is a massive, massive get for them. But he is going to be, an offensive tackle in the NFL coming off an Achilles injury, so we shall see. There's even questions whether he'll be ready for the beginning of the season or not. They did re-sign Xavier Rhodes, who kind of had a career renaissance there last year for them. Was really bad his last couple of years in Minnesota, and then played really well for this Colts team. So they brought him back, brought back T.Y. Hilton as well. They signed tackle Sam Tevy for offensive line depth, Isaac Rochelle for defensive line depth, but that was about it as far as free agency. So they were pretty mild, pretty tame. On the draft pick side of things, and we'll talk about why they went the way that they did in just a second, but they took Kwity Paye in the first round, defensive end. Then they took Dayo Adeyingbo, who is also defensive end in the second round. So first two picks, defensive ends for them. I think the other interesting pick is just that sixth rounder that they took, Sam Ehlinger. So,
yes.
Listen, it's just one of those, like, he's sitting there in the background. Should Carson Wentz be terrible this year?
I brought him up before the draft. It was like the day before, because I was like, nobody has mentioned him once. And, of course, most draftniks will say, well, because he's not really this, prototypical quarterback for the pro level. Yet, he was the guy that if you had a bet on him in college or if you were fading him, you remember almost every Texas bet you had, because he was just that adept at doing it. So it is worth noting.
It's like, look, sixth round pick, it is what it is. But, if he's going to be lingering, and if Carson Wentz is terrible, there will be calls for him to be replaced.
What's the leash on Carson Wentz, in your opinion?
I think they're going to have to make it pretty long, because if not, then they look like morons. So I think it's going to be pretty long. But this is a team that everyone is expecting. Well, I mean, we look at the betting odds of the favorites as far as the division goes, and so with that, I mean, they're expecting production out of this team, and so I think if you look up and they're 3 or 4 games under 500 halfway through the season, I think the calls are going to start being there for sure, saying like, hey, look, we can't have this guy just blow this whole season for us here. I mean, DVOA, if you look back to last year, again, this was with a different starting quarterback, but they were the 12th overall offense in DVOA. The defense was 7th overall. That said, the other thing you can find in Football Outsiders is their strength of schedule DVOA as well. So DVOA ranked strength of schedule, and they had the 32nd. So they had the easiest schedule of any team in the NFL last year. So some of those rankings might be a little bit boosted because of that. ESPN has them as the 14th rated roster heading into 2021, with the offensive line being the biggest strength. And so you kind of take a look at this offensive line heading into 2021. PFF has them ranked second only behind the Browns. Anthony Costanzo did retire for them. He just had an injury-plagued season, and so he went ahead and retired. But listen, Quentin Nelson is one of the very best offensive lineman in the entire league, might be a top 5 guy at any position in the NFL, on the offensive line in the NFL. Braden Smith, the right tackle for them, performed at a really, really high level. Ryan Kelly is a center for them who has always performed last couple of years at a really high level. And then again, if they get Eric Fisher back at even 85, 90%. I mean, we're talking about one of the better offensive linemen in the NFL. It's just coming off of such a major injury like that. I mean, can he be the same guy? But if he is even close to the same guy, then yes, this offensive line is going to be awesome yet again. That said, Pro Football Focus has them 11th power rated heading into the season, 1.8% chance Super Bowl win probability. Has them actually at 8.7 wins, Gil. So they have them way under. Yeah, actually hitting the under like 68% of the time on their win total that is listed right now. So just something to consider. And again, this is just one site's projection system that runs things 10,000 times, simulates things 10,000 times, and that's what it comes out with for this team. Now, the big problem here, we talked about what they did in the draft, 19th rated defensive line heading into the season. And it's basically DeForest Buckner and everybody else, and a whole bunch of guys that really need to kind of step up and make a name for themselves, because they lost Justin Houston, they lost to Nico Autry, so those two guys are gone. So you've got DeForest Buckner, and then you have a whole bunch of young guys that are going to have to step in and play right away. I mean, Kwity Paye, obviously they spent a first-round pick on him. Adeyingbo is going to have to step in and play right away as well. I mean, if you're a first-round pick, second-round pick, and you have the struggles that this defensive line has right now, especially with losing those players, they're going to have to step in and play right away. Komoko Turay is a guy that actually played pretty well in 2019, then got hurt, then came back in 2020, maybe not fully 100%, then got hurt again, but he is supposedly healthy now as well. So if he can kind of get back to his early 2019, that'll certainly help out this defensive line as well. But it's a pretty big concern here for this team, especially when you play in the division that you play in, because you play Derrick Henry. And so not having a defensive line that is very good is certainly going to be something that is not all that great for this team. I saw that we put up the Jonathan Taylor numbers up there, and I mean, we can kind of dovetail this into a little bit of a fantasy discussion as well. But like Jonathan Taylor was massive for people in fantasy side of things. Obviously just went crazy last year. You can see his numbers set at 1250. One thing just to keep in mind is he was not supposed to be the starter for this team. They were going to go with Marlon Mack, and he was going to be the changeup dude. And Marlon Mack is back this year. Now they're going to use Jonathan Taylor, don't get me wrong, but they really like Marlon Mack, and they're going to give him touches there. Nyheim Hines, by the way, also is still around as well for this team.
He was awesome. I loved him last year in his little role.
Yeah, to take some touches away here and there as well. So as awesome as he was last year and getting an extra game and all of that, like, I would play the under here. Like, I'm not going to say pretty confidently, but like fairly confidently, because there are going to be some touches that get siphoned away by Mack. There's going to be touches that get siphoned away by Nyheim Hines. And let's think about this. What if there's two different scenarios here. One, what if this Colts team, what if Carson Wentz is actually really good? And so they have to kind of keep up with the new trend of the NFL, which is passing the ball a ton and moving the ball through the air. So there might be less touches to go around as it is anyway. Or what if the team is terrible? And what if they do regress a ton with Carson Wentz at quarterback? And then they're trailing all the time, and then Jonathan Taylor's just not getting the touches because they're trailing a lot. So I think there's a few different ways, a few different paths for him to hit the under on that 1250 rushing yards, to be honest with you. Just the natural siphoning of touches from Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines of the world, and then also just regression from this team overall, Gil. I mean, if they're trailing, if they're losing games, then those touches just aren't going to be there for him. So I think there's a few different ways for the under to hit.